Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, refiners. I want to introduce you guys to my friend Tauri. Tauri, we've known each other, what, 10, 12 years now?
Yeah,
2012?
12.
Yeah,
It's 12.
2006 maybe. We have a mutual best friend. And so, yeah, we go back a long ways. So I wanted to bring Tauri into our conversation today about cultural appropriation. This is a topic that one of you lovely refiners brought to our the poll that I had created about the topics y'all wanted to hear about. So I have committed and promised hard conversations to you guys this year. Some of them are light, some of them are, a little more controversial. And today may be one of those. And we're going to approach it with the utmost respect and the idea that we might all have different perspectives, and that's okay. But it was a topic that was brought to the table. So I said, sure, let's do it. So, Tauri, explain to us a little bit of your background in talking about this topic, and then help us define cultural appropriation, and then we'll kind of dive into how we're seeing that in events, and we'll go from there.
Perfect. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Tauri, Laws-Phillips. I have a couple of hats in my world. I run the marketing and am a marketing consultant for hair care companies in the beauty industry, which beauty and fashion have their own cultural appropriation issues.
Yeah, right.
Very much so. And then I also am an improviser and a comedian. And with that, I teach very specifically cultural bias trainings that I do for here in Austin, a lot of software and tech companies, really helping people understand how bias is, first of all, implicit in that we all have it, and then two, how it presents itself in our lives and how we can be better about eradicating those biases so we can get along with people better.
Yeah. We all come to it with different lenses, and I think so many of us are willing and ready to see beyond those lenses. So that's the purpose of this conversation. So define for us, define cultural appropriation to us a little bit.
Absolutely. So cultural appropriation is the adoption of elements from a smaller group, so a minority group's culture, for use in a more dominant group's culture. Oftentimes, those elements are adopted in a way that diminishes their value. So oftentimes it is something that could be a religious or cultural artifact or relic that's utilized outside of that culture, oftentimes like in a decorative stance or in adornment, but not necessarily with the weight, with sacrament or that cultural weight that it had originally.
Yeah, absolutely. So in weddings, I think some of the common things that we see are things like prayer candles. Cinco de Mayo stuff certainly can really pull in a lot of those elements. Sometimes even the beer burrows, teepees, the boho elements and themes that we're seeing. And as I've talked to Tauri about this kind of offline and prepping for this conversation, I keep using the word theme, and Tauri keeps going back, that's the point. Like it's not a theme, like these are people's lives. And so those are the common things that stand out to me. And I'm sure there are others, but those stand out. So when we see these things, or we have couples that want to use these types of things, one thing I've asked Tauri to kind of go over with us is talking to our couples about it, and how if we have a certain feeling about it and we're not comfortable with it, but our couples are, how do we handle that?
I think the thing that is really important to remember is that you're the thought leader for your clients. And I have been in similar situations. So I understand that thought process, because you don't want to alienate someone. The difficulty is that rarely is someone saying, oh, let's do a Cinco de Mayo theme, but have ill will.
Right.
Appropriation oftentimes comes like respecting and seeing the beauty in another culture. What you have the opportunity to do is to be the thought leader in that, and to say, hey, how can we elevate this and really understand what it comes from? So like Cinco de Mayo, maybe it's that we should understand that that in Puebla and really nobody else in Mexico actually celebrates it so
I was
much.
gonna say that. Is this like a Texas thing now? Like
exactly. It's
right.
very much like American beer companies is really what it came out
San
of.
Antonio's Fiesta.
Exactly. And how can we sort of elevate it from a cartoon version of a Mexican theme to a really genuine, authentic appreciation for the culture and Tex-Mex culture, as opposed to a cartoon version of Mexican culture. And therefore, you're having a party which theme is about an appreciation for a culture, as opposed to sort of a
disconnect.
Exactly.
Yeah. Because a lot of times our clients might have traveled to, I was just saying this a minute ago, traveled to a place and that was their eat, love, pray journey, and they really connected with that culture, and then they want to incorporate it. Maybe that's even where this couple met, I don't know, but they want to incorporate it into their weddings. We're seeing so many personal elements in weddings, but there's not a whole lot of context for that within, for the guests.
Yeah.
And so they're wanting to provide this guest experience that includes that, but just making sure that that's a little bit more understood through signage, maybe even in programs, things of that nature. Tauri, talk to us about about a month ago, I had a client. She's from San Antonio and he was from Cuba, and so you've got her family is Mexican, as a lot of people in San Antonio are, and the Cubano culture and all that, they really wanted to incorporate that, and so we did. And we had a lot of what would appear just on Instagram as like, oh, I threw a fiesta, but it was an authentic party for them. And so, of course, now that I have these images for my portfolio, I would love to use them, but I don't want to come across as just flippant about it. So how might I use these images in a way that is respectful? Is there a certain thing I should do with my captions? How do I treat that?
I would explain that. So I think one, diversity is absolutely celebrated and a thing that we're moving toward. Yay!
About time.
But so I would be really specific about that. So I think it's telling the story of a Cuban and Cuban and Mexican wedding theme that's based on a love for their cultures.
Right.
Using hashtags that are approved by your couple, like making sure they're comfortable with it, because you want to make sure they're comfortable with that being a part of it. You don't want somebody to look back and like it's hashtag Cubano, which I think is very appropriate, but we want to make sure that they're comfortable with it. I would utilize hashtags, utilize the story, and make sure that it's understood that it is really authentic.
Yeah.
What an amazing story to have. And that is absolutely them. So I would assume that they would be super comfortable with it.
Sharing that. We even had the caterer use a family recipe, and like,
absolutely.
I thought that was really neat that this caterer was willing to do that.
Well, that's the story.
But that gets lost in translation or just like a picture on Instagram.
But I think that story, one, does translate to what your caption is. That family recipe was used. It shows you going above and beyond. It shows that caterer's willingness to go above and beyond. Those are things that help sell you and that caterer moving forward, that you're both willing to go above and beyond and make those things authentic. That's also a difficulty, is that appropriation in is easy to judge within a social media culture. So that's also why the story is really important.
Well, it's tricky too, because as I'm sure you particularly see in the beauty industry, we'll post a picture on here and we'll have the whole story and all of the appropriate credits and everything. And then someone somehow or another gets it onto their Pinterest board because they're just tagging it as an inspiration photo, and then the story doesn't follow. And then it's just all of a sudden gone viral, for lack of better terms. It's gone viral, and now you've got all these teepees everywhere on Pinterest, and now you've got, you know,
and you easily,
Joe Schmo, little white girl that like me that has nothing to do with teepees, and I'm like, I love the teepee, and what does that even mean at that point? And when, like, how does that feel towards people when they're scrolling through Pinterest and there's no context, there's no story, it's just a fun thing. And I don't know, it's kind of word vomit thought, but
no, I mean, it's
if the story doesn't translate or follow, on some level, I feel like maybe I shouldn't post those pictures
but it's your work.
There's a risk of it not.
But it's that, it's that double-edged sword, because that's your work. You worked really hard for it. Their wedding does get to be celebrated because it's beautiful and amazing.
And we really should expect people, as they repin it or whatever, that they, I guess that's on them, really. As long as I do the...
You've done your work, and your client's done their work on their end to do what you did right.
Yeah.
So your nose is clean from there on out, sort of.
Good to hear. No, but that happens, and it, and then that's when I get the client that's like, I want to do this with my wedding, and there's such a disconnect. Well, it becomes inspiration as opposed to real, authentic. And like, that's when the hashtags, I think, get carried away.
Absolutely.
And, I think even boho as a hashtag was it became like a ghost hashtag at one point because it was so
overused.
Yeah.
Well, I think of it in fashion terms. I used to have the incredible opportunity to work with an amazing designer who was very, she was one of the first designers who did a lot of tribal prints and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she would go and live with a shaman and
learn it.
Yeah, learn it and live on a reservation, and brought back authentic things. And her fashion shows were very inspired and so bright and colorful and amazing prints. And now her prints have trickled down to the Walmart and Target versions. And don't get me wrong, I love that Target version top, but I don't know that the designers at Target went and did not give any of their proceeds to that reservation or the groups of children within that. They didn't partner with the charities on the reservation the same way that she did, and nor were they attributing that in any way. They were just copying what came from.
I had a real hard time, actually. Tauri and I went to Beyonce together recently. It was Jay-Z. I was there for Jay-Z.
Yes, you were.
I think everyone else was there for Beyonce, but I was there anyway. So we were talking about this in the car ride to Dallas, and I even said that the tribal thing had kind of bothered me when it became so mainstream, because I actually felt a sense of I own a piece of this tribal pie, because I lived in Arizona for so long, and New Mexico, West Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona are a really special part of my life, and we were on reservations a lot, and got to know people, and a lot of my home decor, I bring that in. I have that's not appropriation, but I have the sense of the West and all of that in my home. And when everything turned tribal, I was like, no, this is who I am. It's not me, but it's these copycats.
Well, but it is absolutely your culture, and it's a culture you subscribe to authentically because you lived it. You lived it during formative years of your life. Mm-hmm. So your attachment to a cactus is very different than mine.
But the funny thing is that someone on that reservation would hear me say that and still be like, you have no idea what you're talking about. You're the one that caused all these problems. but I still feel so drawn to, but I want to understand that culture. I feel drawn to it, and I feel, and so I try to incorporate it in ways that, when my kids try to play those Texas games, I'm like, that's a real thing.
Absolutely.
And have those real conversations. So, I digress beyond events and into parenting, which no one's here for. But
well, I think that's where, not to liken your clients to children.
Well, everyone giggles.
But it really is about the information, and it's that's where appropriation can become appreciation, is simply giving them the information and giving them the opportunity to do with it what they must.
Yeah.
And from your perspective, it is, I just, the last wedding I went to simply described why they had the things that they had. Now, these were big music people, so they had a list of their songs and why they'd used each song.
Yeah.
And it was really funny to me because they played lots of hip hop, and the table behind me was like, now why are they playing, you get the older parents, like the aunts and uncles, why are they playing this rap crap? And it was, then they looked and it was like, oh, this, this was in the car on their first date sort of a thing. And it's the same kind of information that you can, and then you hear from the aunt, aww.
Yeah.
Because they remembered that. So it's having, why do we have the prayer candles? This is what they signify, and this is its connection to us. Or when we went on this trip, this is what we went to a temple, and this is why we have this sort of a thing. So because weddings are very personal events, and it is our opportunity in our American culture to translate so much of ourselves to our families. It's the opportunity to give those personal notes that really elevate an event.
People feel really connected to it.
Absolutely.
We did for our wedding. I think I've shared this with the Refined community. My dad's a pastor, and so the marriage covenant, I looked up all the Christian symbolism in weddings, because I decided I wanted to understand. And we all know what the vow, we all know the promise we're making, right? But I wanted to understand why we have certain traditions versus just doing them, because a lot of people throw those out, and I threw a lot of them out, but I wanted to understand what they were before I threw them out. And so I ended up doing, apparently, so in the Bible, when people are making a covenant, it's considered holy ground. And also, holy ground is typically approached with bare feet. And so, in our wedding, I walked down the aisle barefoot, and which could be so weird to someone. And so I ended up using some space in our program, and the back, it was a little pamphlet, more or less, because I wanted to explain all these things. Yeah. So I listed all this, the Christian symbolism in the wedding ceremony. I listed it all out, and I explained why I was barefoot and things like that. And for months after the wedding, people were like, I never knew that. That meant, your wedding meant so much more to me, because I thought back to my wedding, or all these different things. So when you explain something that's important about your culture or your religion or whatever, people feel so connected to what you're doing, whether they agree with it or are a part of it or whatever, but they love you as a friend. It's of interest.
Absolutely.
And so, and we were talking about henna actually right before we went live, and one of my sweet brides had invited, I'm so embarrassed, I can't even remember the name of someone tell me, what is the name of the henna party that the Indian culture does before the wedding? It's so beautiful. She invited me to join them, and I wanted to go, but then I felt like I'm just going to walk around for 2 weeks with henna, and people in Target have no idea the context. Is that tacky? I don't know. And but then Tauri reminds me, tell them what you told me.
Well, it's you're partaking in it with a friend and celebrating her culture and celebrating her with it. So me as a friend, I'd be like, yeah, go do it, because you're partaking it with her. Very different than if you and I on a Saturday afternoon were like, do we
Manny's
go?
Petty plus henna.
Exactly. We're just going to go get Manny's Petties and henna.
Yeah.
Sort of a thing. That would be quite different. And that's where I think it enters appropriation, when you have no connection to the symbolism, and you're just doing it because it's cool.
Yeah.
It's a mehendi party.
Of course, Cassie knows this.
Good job.
Good job, Cassie.
And I think that's when it really starts to feel icky. The other thing is that I always explain to people that the difficulty with appropriation is feeling like somebody took something away from you that came from a pure place. Like, you wanted to do it because you thought it was beautiful, and thinking that something is beautiful is not, that's not an impure reason to want to do something. It just happens to be on the surface where you haven't done the depth of research to really have a deeper appreciation for it. And anyone can do that. So
and the way I feel when I can't have the prayer candles for no particular reason out on this table, the way I feel with that being taken away from me is far less severe than the person that's walking up to a party where everyone's drunk and then there's a religious symbol of theirs on a table. Like, their feeling in that moment is not good. I mean, like, it totally outweighs the way I feel by being told, no, I shouldn't have the prayer candles. So just think of it in that way. But also, so a lot of people in this group do birthday parties and anniversaries and things like that. And so I don't know how many of you do like kids parties, but that's a big thing, like Moana themes and whatnot. And we talked about that a little bit too. What is
I think a Moana theme is having a party that's based on a cartoon.
A Disney movie.
Having a luau is a little different. And then really, it's sort of, I think it's the opportunity to elevate and, again, give everybody a little more information. So if you're, I saw a great piece online, and it was sort of like, if you can buy it at a party store and it was made in China, it's probably not doing its best job of celebrating a culture. Probably not. Now, having said that, if my daughter wanted to be Moana for Halloween, I wouldn't have no issue with that. If she wanted to be a, Hawaiian princess, then we would have a different conversation about that. And everybody's done it. I confess that I was a geisha in 3rd grade.
Yeah, we talked about this.
And I wore whiteface to school in 3rd grade. And definitely in hindsight, though I remember my older brother like giving me as kid-friendly an education in what geishas were as possible, I feel bad about that in retrospect. Like, that probably wasn't the best thing for my mom to allow me to do. Besides the feminist overtones of it. But I just thought it was really pretty. I think when it comes to kids' parties, how much can you really impart about a culture? It's also sort of things like, if you're catering, can you use someone who actually is Hawaiian and who really gives you a little more information than just, here's some barbecue pork with some pineapples on top. It's like, if you pull the pineapples out of a can, how authentic is it, sort of a thing. So being more authentic as opposed to the cartoon version of a culture, you're probably going to do better. And it's really, it's just kind of checking yourself and deciding what you're comfortable with and giving your clients the information to decide what they're comfortable with.
Yeah. I wish we could go back to just saying, like, it's all about intentions and good hearts. And as much as I think that's true in a lot of areas of life, and really even this one, because that's the cornerstone, but like it just goes beyond that in some ways.
I think it goes beyond that, and I think it's also I think now we're at a place where good hearts and good intentions allow us to utilize the information we have access to.
Yeah, that's a good way to word it.
And now we have access to, when I was a little kid in 3rd grade, we had World Books and Britannicas. You didn't have the whole internet worth
like 2 paragraphs on like a 10-year war.
Exactly. So now we have access to the internet and so much information. So can we really go beyond sort of just that cartoon version of it?
Yeah, like know better, do better. I say that
Absolutely.
a lot. And that can be painful and hard and uncomfortable, and it's not always fun because it does feel like it's taking something away.
Yeah.
But I think you hear me say this all the time, when you say no to one thing, you're saying yes to another, and saying no, like having that taken away from me means that someone else maybe feels better about the situation. That's worth it to me.
It's also like, I think it's sort of, the feeling is, if you've ever seen like in Europe and in Russia, they'll have American-themed parties.
I've been thinking about a way to like pull this in. Like,
Yeah.
does America? I'll tell you what my thoughts.
Yeah.
Go for it.
So if you Google this, you'll see pictures of teenagers and young adults in Europe wearing American flags with red Solo cups and sort of like cowboy hats, and essentially reducing.
Because we all ride horses to work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Reducing Americana and the things that we hold dear to sort of the cartoon version of what Americans seem like to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And there's usually some like urban hip hop-ness thrown in there with like gold teeth and gold chains and afro wigs and hats backward and those sorts of things that are so reductive and hurtful and painful.
Yeah.
And when you see that suddenly, and you realize that people think all of us are the least of what we could possibly be. So sort of it's like, oh, throw in an American t-shirt and suddenly you're an American. It's like, but we're so much more, is the feeling that we are, as a country, we are so diverse. We do celebrate our diversity despite, all of sort of
I
the
think even on
happening.
a really basic level, the way to get this to resonate is like football teams, right? Like
Absolutely.
Someone just shows up to Austin and they're putting on a Longhorn t-shirt and like, no, you're not a local until you've been here for like 30 years, right?
Exactly.
Like, you can't just throw on a t-shirt and be a Longhorn fan.
Yeah.
And I'm not a Longhorn fan, but I'm just like, it's
Me neither.
an easy like
Yeah.
like team sports and stuff like that. But okay, so two thoughts here. Back to the kind of like party store, dollar store, whatever. I was kind of thinking, gosh, well, so there's two camps of event planners, right? Half of us have kids parties that are so elaborate, it's like our clients' parties, and then there's the other camp where I fall, where I'm like, holy cow, the party's tomorrow, dollar store, go. Like, because my brain is just so done. Like, I've done it all professionally that I just don't have anything. I don't know.
They're 4 years old. They're not going to know the difference.
Whatever. I can tell you Ford has already planned his 5th birthday party. But yeah, for 4th of July, I go to the dollar store, I get all my flags and stuff like that. And so in that sense, it's like a lot of stuff does come from the party store. That's like,
and those flags are
like
not,
part of it.
Yeah, they're not made in America.
But okay, so then on that token, talk to me about like the aspect of overthinking, because that's a pushback in this culture. Like, okay, well, you're overthinking it, and maybe at times people do overthink it, and we aren't responsible for everyone's like sensitivity or like, oh, they're so offended by, like, at some point we have to live our lives. So what does that look like as far as like the overthinking? I don't know that I really have a question there. I'm just kind of that just comes up so much, like, oh, you're just overthinking it, or like people are too sensitive, or what is our response? What I just feel like with boundaries, we can't always be responsible for the feelings of others. However, we can be considerate of them. So formulate a question there.
I think the current tone is to err on the side of sensitivity. I think sort of like, because I think there's always a bell curve with like where we are culturally. And I think right now people err on the side of not doing anything that could be a sticky place, because it's easier to just not touch it with a 10-foot pole than to get into a scary place. I think me personally, I think you decide where your personal line is. So is your line prayer candles, or is your line religious relics, like cultural stuff, whatever? But if it's religion related, that feels icky to me. I'm not willing to touch it. You kind of decide where your line is. In a perfect world, I think we have to be responsible for the reactions that people might have to what it is that we do. That's me personally. So it requires so much mindfulness that it is a lot of work. It's a lot of extra. So I think you can read the information, be aware, have the awareness, and then sort of decide what you're comfortable doing.
For me, it can feel really frustrating because I like to consider myself, or I'm often it's often pointed out that I'm a very like aware and considerate person. Like altruistic is a word that people will just on their own describe me as. But then I feel like I'm constantly like 2 days later being like, oh my gosh, I could have thought through that so much better. Like they would have felt so much better if I had done X, Y, Z. And I don't try to live like beat myself up about it or live in regrets about it. But like even as a very aware person, it's hard. So if this is a struggle, like give yourself some grace and like know that all we can do here is work towards knowing better, doing better with the awareness that you do have. And if that means that it's not becoming a aware moment until 3 days later, then like at least you had it a few days later and know for next time.
You know better for the future. I think the other thing is that the other thing I often tell people from a bias perspective is that what we can't control is how other people feel about what it is that we do. So there's a prevailing thought process of like people are too sensitive. And no, I don't think people are more sensitive now. I just think people are more comfortable voicing their than they had the opportunity to voice in the past. So
that opportunity. Like,
absolutely. There was no access for, no one was willing to listen 20 years ago or 30 years ago or 50 years ago. And now they simply have the voice to be able to say what they were in a system of oppression to not be able to say before.
And technology makes that easier.
Absolutely. And if you think about just literally not, that your voice was not strong enough to be able to speak before, and you can liken that to so many current movements, it's like that in itself is why it matters that even we get to have this conversation and that there's an awareness and that there's people listening. That's so much growth.
True.
It's so much growth that even people care, because 10 years ago people would have said cultural appropriation.
It's just so it's hard. Don't think this is something that can just, I mean, I feel like I've had a huge heart change about it in the last year or so, and Tauri has seen that journey in me. But even still, I'm like, oh, I got it wrong again. And, but I just think it's neat and important to try. And so that was the point of this conversation. And, so if anyone has any questions, Cassie, I see that you wrote responsibility, just equating to like paying homage, and absolutely just like, you know, bringing that to the forefront of what's happening and making sure that everyone as part of the guest experience is aware of that in some way or another, to whatever level they're able to receive. Because like you said, the kids' parties, like there's only so much they can take in. But I mean, even my kid, and my kids are in preschool, and they'll do, you know, Thanksgiving's coming around the corner, and it's so easy to like, what do they, I remember last year at school, they sent home some pictures, and I was like, what were y'all teaching my kids today? And I talked to the teachers, and come to find out, I mean, like on their level, they talked about it, but I was like, they're just running around in like Indian chief hats. Like, I'm not okay with this. And so, but my child learned something on a 3-year-old level, and I was okay with it at that point. And so, just doing what we can with the audience that we have and whatnot. And so, anyway, it doesn't look like there's any questions. Do you have anything else you want to add?
I don't think I do. Okay. If there's questions, I'm happy to let me know.
I actually do have a question. This is so outside of events, but I want to hear just a quick tidbit on what is so you do this a lot in the comedy circuits.
Yes.
And comedy is undergoing a major shift.
Absolutely.
In just humor direction, just PC wise. And so what is the biggest shift, or like what is that looking like in that?
Well, I'll
world?
tell you, 10 years ago, I would often walk on stage and be endowed with the worst stereotypes of what Black women would be. So 10 years ago, people would like point to me and call me on stage and be like, "Hey, Bunquisha," and I would be like, really? And so my turnaround would always be like, oh, okay, I'm going to be the president in this scene, sort of a thing. Like, far before we even knew there could be a Black president. I would be like, okay, I'm going to be your president, or I'm going to be your dominatrix, or I'm going to be something, higher status than you. And now people allow me to be a full range of things, as opposed to sort of like those reductive caricatures of what they thought a Black woman had to be, and giving me sort of this much range. Now people expect that I'm capable
and
of celebrate
a lot more.
Exactly. And celebrate it and like allow me to be more. So that in itself is amazing. It's still hard for women, period. I still see castings. I recently saw a casting for PhD level scientist 25 to 35, and I was like, how quick do you think people can get their PhDs? Like, are you kidding me?
Especially during like fertile years.
Exactly. Like, are you kidding me? Or you still see like castings for sexy Beyonce type, must have blonde hair down to the butt or longer, and you're like, what? And then they'll say light skin only, and you're like, what about brown skin girls? Like, and then I'm like, would I be light skinned? So
how do you define it?
Exactly. Like, who defines it? And do we go back to a paper bag test? And oh my God, it's so many things. So it's like, for so far we go back. There are amazing things. UCB, Upright Citizens Brigade, just had their diversity comedy festival in LA, which I was able to play the first one of that, their first inaugural festival. So it's coming along, and there's an awareness now, but comedy's still in the infancy of that. There's still always lists of funniest women, and it's like there's 3, or like funniest comedians, 100 guys and 5 women, sort of.
And the reason I asked that question, I think, is because I think in a lot of ways, comedy, whether it be stage comedy, who's ringing my doorbell? Hello. Stage comedy, or it just be like street humor, it like really, I think, sets the tone for
absolutely
what's appropriate or not. I mean, humor is, because what happens with humor is that like we're uncomfortable with something, and so we take a serious conversation and we like make a joke, and it like bubbles up to a surface conversation, and it's all like, humor really directs so much of our culture.
Oh yeah. I do quite a bit of shows where I'm like, oh, that's really funny and really racist, and then some white guy I'm on stage with is like, oh, sorry, Tauri, and they'll use my real name when they respond.
Not a character,
and I'm like, we're still on stage, dummy.
But I'm excited to see where we're going. So
I think that the pendulum will swing back to a place. They're gonna ring twice.
Swing
back to a place where there's more sensitivity and understanding toward the appreciation versus calling everything out as appropriation. But it'll take time.
It'll take time. Everything, and it'll, like you said, it'll go back. Go 2 steps forward, 1 step back. 2 steps forward, 1
always.
Step back. So,
but conversations like this will make it so much better. So kudos to everyone watching.
So thanks for joining us. Ask questions throughout the day if you're watching this on replay, and I'll shoot them over to Tauri to tackle them myself. But anyway, all right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Bye.